Welcome to this session. It's part of Capstone People Consultants Knowledge Series. I'm just doing a quick check. You can hear me. Rupali, Sunit, give me a voice check and you can see me.
Yes, Dr. Banerjee.
All right. Okay. Lovely. Super. So, welcome everybody. I know this is a much looked forward to conversation. Going by the number of you who wrote in asking for a seat to be able to join our conversation. We're a little delayed because some people are delayed in terms of being able to join, but we're going to start nevertheless in the interest of those of you who are already here. For those I haven't met before, I'm Dr. Sujaya Banerjee, and I'm the founder, CEO of Capstone People Consulting. I'm also the founder of the Learning and OD Roundtable and the Women Leadership Forum of Asia. And I'm delighted to start the year literally by being able to present this much looked forward to conversation. And I do know that we, through the LNOD Forum, held so many learning events and conversations through last year. Many of our panelists here also participated. And I think one of the things that kept coming back was, when are we going to have a conversation around what's changed around leadership development? So I'm really excited to present this under the aegis of Capstone People Consulting. There's a reason for why we're doing this under the aegis of Capstone People Consulting, and it's because we're also going to use this platform to be able to introduce and announce a very interesting, very relevant, and much needed platform that we've associated with as Capstone. And so we'll talk a bit about that in only a while. So for those of you who don't know about Capstone People Consulting, I'll spend a couple of minutes just introducing Capstone, and then I'm going to be able to announce the association that I want you all to know about. And then let's introduce our very erudite panelists that we have on board today. And I'm so looking forward to moderating this conversation on leadership development in the new economy. So let's start. Rupali, help me with the deck. Can you get our deck up, please? And yes, so Capstone People Consulting. This is a very vibrant startup. We started this over 3 years ago, and in a span of 3 years, we do work with a very large number of both MNCs and private organizations. Over 70 organizations that we work with. Move forward. And we do work, in the space of leadership and change, but under two brands, Capstone People Consulting and Pinnacle Learning. We've got very interesting associations. We have Leo Girl Productions, which is a resident in-house video and theater production organization. They create content for social change, and we're tremendously proud of working together with Leo Girl Productions, which perhaps works with many of you joining in today. The Women Leadership Forum of Asia, this is a not-for-profit. It's under the aegis of the Learning and OD Roundtable, which we created over 10 years ago. So LNOD and Women Leadership Forum of Asia are both not-for-profits. LNOD Roundtable has over 25,000 heads of human resources, talent, learning and change, who are, and several CXOs who are part of this movement as members. And the Women Leadership Forum of Asia, which is ever growing, now at 15,000 plus members. This is a forum that is committed to helping organizations create cultures of diversity and inclusion. So with that, move forward, and I'll quickly tell you what it is that we do. We're in the space, like I said, of leadership and change. We work in the space of design thinking and innovation mindsets. Move forward. And so diversity and inclusion is a huge area of focus, interest, and passion for us. A huge amount of technology-based learning solutions. We're going to talk today about our association with iGESIA, but we have very many options of online learning. We associate with. We work with Question Pro on pulse surveys and 360-degree feedback surveys. We work with various organizations on being able to create technology-based integrated learning solutions. Move forward. Pinnacle Learning is a sister organization, much like Leo Girl Productions, and Pinnacle is committed to helping organizations building high-performance cultures, particularly through sales teams. Corporate Smart is our new offering on the block. This is about being able to create professionals who are, who can be disruption friendly. So literally creating a new lens for young professionals to be able to deal with all the change and the turbulence that we're dealing with in the new economy. This has got 18 learning modules, and there are organizations actively signing up for this as part of their learning solution for 2021. For those of you who want to know more about this, you can reach out to Rupali or to Sunit. They'll be happy to be able to tell you more about it. InnovLearn continues to be a very popular offering, which is to be able to use the power of music and theater and poetry and so many other creative modes and pedagogies to be able to help drive change within organizations. Move forward. Pinnacle Learning, Corporate Smart, I mentioned this already. This is primarily to be able to have junior and mid-level, mid to senior level employees within organizations create a new lens of dealing with the changes that they're experiencing, that they're all experiencing, and make meaning together of the change that they're experiencing through being able to explore 6 kind of intelligences, is to create a group of people who are, like I said, anti-fragile, able to deal with all the changes and the turbulence that we're all seeing around us. Move forward. Our learning hub is the integrated solution. This actually works on being able to create online learning platforms for off-role employees and for new employees that you may be onboarding. This is actually to be able to create an integrated learning experience using all kinds of technologies together. This is very new age. It's very next gen, and invite those who want to know more about the Learning Hub on how to be able to revolutionize your online learning platforms by being able to use the power of the Learning Hub. Move forward. And here I want to be able to take the opportunity to be able to introduce a very powerful association that we've created in the last quarter of last year, which is with the iGESIA Academy. This has been the brainchild of Professor Soumitra Datta, who's on the panel today and is going to be in conversation with us shortly. This is actually, this whole iGESIA value proposition kind of revolutionizes executive education, global executive education, which is now can be delivered online and live. And I think one of the biggest advantages we have of the current scenario is that we can literally access thought leadership from anywhere across the world. So Professor Datta has actually taken that idea forward by being able to create a very new age learning platform called iGESIA Academy. Move forward, and I'll tell you something more about it, why I call it breakthrough and why I find it so outstandingly relevant in the times that we exist in. So iGESIA is a Greek word which means leadership that is necessary to translate vision and new concepts into reality. Move forward. And this is actually, our association is with iGESIA. So it associates with Capstone's leadership and change practice. Move forward. And this is essentially an amazing way to be able to keep costs in check, use online platforms to be able to access, like I said, executive education anywhere in the world. It actually uses a very unique concept of marketplace for faculty. Move forward. I'll come to that in just a bit. Yeah. So it integrates a marketplace of faculty, which means it gives you access to 800 business schools, 900 liberal arts colleges, and 400 engineering schools. Just look at that. This is amazing. 2,100 colleges from across the world. You can actually access faculty from any of these places. And we're literally talking about many Ivy League schools here. I'll give you a sense of the kind of faculty we're referring to. Move forward. And, we see the spread, and it's quite interesting. You have people from INSEAD and from Stanford and from King's College London, and of course, Cornell. So keep moving, move forward. Some more here, and you can see that they're all very distinguished people from different streams and from different colleges, literally from across the globe. And this value proposition, this platform called iGESIA, is actually leveraging the power of what just happened, this very severe disruption with learning, which is that you can now online integrate and learn from anyone you want to from across the world. Move forward. These are live classrooms, so they're not in the recorded format. And we have the format of both open programs where you can nominate people to attend, and keep going, move forward. So open programs like these, so you have options and you can see what kind of open programs and the themes, and these are only illustrated. There's obviously a whole host of open programs that can get curated and created depending on what it is that you all would like to see more of in terms of being offered here in India. So you can either nominate people to attend these, keep going, move forward. You have some interesting themes here like Industry 4.0, design thinking for innovation, cybersecurity, very widespread because you saw we have access to business colleges, we have access to technical schools, we've got access to very outstanding liberal arts colleges. Keep going forward. There's a program on IPR management, for example, or even for academia to be able to transform themselves with being able to access thought leadership from various parts of the world. So these are only indicative open programs. There's a whole host that can easily get curated, especially with access to 2,100 schools across the world. This is a very solid value proposition in terms of being able to curate and create any kind of learning solution. Move forward. And like these are essentially live virtual classrooms. They are interactive. They can eventually have active work groups that work with a coach. So they're all live sessions. Yes, they essentially live sessions can be delivered. Lots of flexibility in the formats in which they can be delivered. Move forward. So we kind of on the open program front look at being able to combine this with Capstone's proprietary diagnostic abilities. The idea is to be able to create a learning solution for a seamless learner experience that is delivered on a very outstanding platform. iGESIA has its own platform as well, but it can very, very well deliver on any platform. So there is that flexibility to be able to work on the iGESIA platform or any other platform. It also gives you, so all these programs are done under the aegis of UCLA. So the certification is from UCLA. And it also provides you with access to a very vibrant alumni community. Move forward. This is a great quote from Peter Senge, and we wanted to just end by being able to say that through learning, we recreate ourselves, and through learning, we reperceive the world and our relationship to it. Through learning, we extend our capacity to create and to be part of a generative process of life. There is within each of us a deep hunger for this type of learning. And I think that is the kind of learning that we're looking to be able to create and curate through the iGESIA platform. I'm just going to try and take a little bit of a pause here, and because we do have the man of the moment on this call, I'm going to request Professor Datta, of Cornell University to be able to just say a few words. This has been very much your idea, Professor Datta, and we're very excited to partner with you on this. Can you tell the audience a few things that you'd like to share in terms of how you came about to be able to curate this, and anything else that you want to say to the audience today?
No, so thank you very much, Dr. Banerjee, and I think you're doing outstanding work. Congratulations on that. We're very happy to partner and work with you, and I'm very delighted to join this panel, very distinguished colleagues. Myself, I have been in education for more than 30 years right now, and I think a passion for education is something that all of us share, I think, on this session today. And, I have been Dean of Executive Education at INSEAD, running one of the biggest portfolio for many years. I was Dean of the school at Cornell University, again, running a whole business school. And I have been involved myself in executive education in different ways. And I came to realize that there were things that were good about how we were doing things and things that where we could improve further. I also teach about digital transformation myself, and I see analysts focus on digital transformation. There's a great synergy out there too. So in some sense, I was looking at what's happening in the world out there, how Amazon is building a whole different ecosystem for retail and successfully doing so. So I thought, can we not leverage the power of digital technology to be able to create a new ecosystem that somehow brings together the best faculty, the best universities, the best minds, the best organizations, and the best sort of executives together, and sort of creates a whole new learning sort of ecosystem, new programs, and innovations of various kinds. So the iGESIA is really an attempt at trying to build this whole ecosystem. We have the whole technology platform where we have invested a lot of time and effort into the last 18 months. And we've also built up a whole faculty marketplace, which is very large and very deep, more than 100,000 faculty around different disciplines. And now we are in fact very proud and happy to work with Capstone and trying to create very customized, very unique programs in a flexible manner without necessarily being constrained by some of the limitations that you might get if you work with any one school as an institution. So we want to make it more flexible, more innovative, more open. And I hope we can have a chance to talk about some of these things also in the panel today. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much, Professor Datta. Thank you for that. Move forward, Rupali. I'm going to, at this point, sort of grab the moment to be able to introduce the panel to all of you. We've called it Leadership Development in the New Economy. And by the new economy, we're talking about what has emerged and has been emerging around us this past very eventful year. But we'll come to that in only some time. It is my proud privilege at this time to be able to introduce the faculty to you. Professor Datta has already spoken. He's the Professor of Management at the former founding Dean of the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University, New York. He was previously at INSEAD and was the Dean of Executive Education, where he managed the second largest portfolio of executive programs amongst global business schools. He's also the chairman and co-founder of IGESIA, which is what we're introducing to this panel here today. So welcome, Professor Datta, one more time. Next, it is my privilege to be able to introduce to you someone I have known for many years and admire greatly. He's currently the managing director and country digitization at Cisco Systems. Anil and I used to be colleagues at AGC Networks, where I served on the board. And I'm very excited to have Anil on this panel here today. Anil Nair did his advanced management program from ISB Kellogg Business School, Chicago. And he's led about 4 turnarounds, 2 startups, has been the recipient of an award for professional excellence by the Indian Institution of Industrial Engineers, and has also won the Udyog Ratan Award. His current role at Cisco, he is involved with government, industry leaders, and academia in accelerating national digitization strategies to drive economic growth, create jobs, and build innovative ecosystems across India, China, Taiwan, Australia, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, and Thailand. So Anil, welcome one more time. Very excited to have you on this panel. Next, I'm delighted to introduce Richard Reiki. Richard never ceases to surprise me and fascinate me with his intellect and his very charming persona, and you will experience that today. Richard is presently a board member of KPMG in Dubai. He was the former CEO of KPMG India and was a member of the global board and the council of KPMG International. He is a CA with over 37 years of experience in consulting and professional services. So welcome, Richard, and thank you for accepting to be on this panel. Next, I'm really delighted to be able to welcome someone that I believe is extremely not just like-minded, but I think we kind of share a lot of common perceptions. I'm looking forward to validating some of what I'm thinking on this theme, Gauri, as I hear you speak on the panel today. So Gauri Padmanabhan, global partner, and leads the CEO and board and consumer markets practices for Hydrix and Struggles in India. She oversees social impact and the diversity practice in South Asia. She's a long tenured partner, has been with Hydrix and Struggles since 2000, so almost 21 years, has played a key role in building the firm's business in India. Working closely at the top, she's assisted clients in building their leadership teams in South Asia and the region. Her clients include large global and Indian corporations across sectors and in the consumer-facing space. I have no qualms in stating that Gauri Padmanabhan is easily one of the most respected executive search partners in India. So welcome, Gauri, and thank you for accepting to speak on the panel today. Last but not the least, Preeti De Mello, head of diversity and lead academy at Tata Consultancy Services. At the cost of pressurizing Preeti for the nth time, I have to say that among the many webinars that we delivered last year, I think we got the most outstanding feedback for Preeti's conversation around anti-fragility last year. So We're very excited to welcome you back. I mean, this conversation's around leadership, and could not think of any practitioner other than you to be able to really have on board this conversation. So thank you for agreeing to join us today. Preeti is leadership coach and an expert in positive organizational development and change. She has a master's in positive OD from Case Western University, and on adult development, science of positive and coaching psychology at Harvard University, and leadership maturity coaching. She also holds an advanced practitioner certification in the polarity approach for continuity and transformation, appreciative inquiry, process work, and emotional intelligence, amongst others. At TCS, Preeti's mandate includes creating a sustainable culture of leadership and diversity, and she's launched many strategic global initiatives in the coaching and mentoring and leadership development space. And these initiatives have very much been lauded by the Institute of Coaching, Harvard, and won them the gold from Brandon. So congratulations, very illustrious career, and very much respected, thought leader. So welcome, Preeti. Very, very excited to have you all on board. So I'm wondering if you can have this off so that we can see all our panelists. So to get all our panelists on board so that we can look at all of them. And I don't know, can you use the gallery mode so that we can have everyone? Yeah, okay, super. All right, so fantastic. One more time, thank you for accepting to be able to be part of this conversation. Meanwhile, some ground rules for the audiences, which is that, we are using the webinar format of Zoom. So this essentially keeps you muted and your cameras off. So I want you to know that we're absolutely interested in knowing your perspective and your points of view as we go along. This is a very relevant, very topical, theme. And I know a lot of you have joined in because you want to learn and understand from the perspectives of all the thought leaders that we have here on board today. So do use the chat very actively. Use the Q&A box as well. Feel free to be able to post your questions. But we want the chat really vibrant. So keep your comments going and keep your perspectives going. And, if you do want us to be able to ask a specific question, you may want to indicate which panelists you want us to direct it to so that you are able to direct your question to who you would like. So please keep that going. We want to be able to hear from you as well. Very much interested in hearing your perspective. So I think I'm just going to try and set a bit of a context to this conversation before we dive in. I mean, this has clearly been, a very, very unprecedented time for everyone, highly disruptive. The pandemic that we've experienced through last year has been a very exceptional experience, even for very veteran professionals across industries. The coronavirus has infected people, taken away lives, taken away livelihoods. This has easily been one of the most difficult times for humanity. This has also been a very interesting time and a very, very great time to be able to question old paradigms, old playbooks, and to be able to write new playbooks. I was just mentioning to a group of people this morning that there's so much excitement around the vaccination. And if you come to think of it, the coronavirus itself has been like a vaccination. It's kind of not like the vaccine does not attack the disease directly, it creates antibodies to do that. The pandemic has done exactly that. It's been like a vaccine. It has kind of created so many it's created so many antibodies to address malaises of the past. And suddenly a whole lot of organizations have just fast forwarded into doing a whole lot of things that they were reluctant to do earlier. So these are times that have sort of clearly accelerated the knowledge economy for us here in India. Maybe we were reluctant and not letting go of the industrial era. And suddenly what we see unfolding around us is the knowledge economy, many aspects of the knowledge economy, and many compulsions for being able to enable the knowledge economy to be able to survive and succeed in this new world. So I want to, in this context, and I know we just introduced Egesia Academy, I just want to be able to ask, and this question really goes out to all of you right at the start, which is that given the nature of this very unprecedented and turbulent year that we've just experienced, would you agree that these times require a pedagogy that is very personal, where people need to go within rather than reach out? And I'm wondering how many of you believe this is an important time for an inside-out kind of transformation, especially in the leadership space. And what I mean by that is that Do you agree that these times require for leaders to be able to draw from their past experiences, from how they're connecting certain pieces of data? There is so much of uncertainty and interdependency. Would you agree that these times are not about gleaning into books or looking for things outside, but to look from within to be able to find solutions to many of the new and impending problems that leaders experience around them? So, want your reaction to what you believe is an important pedagogy for leaders in this era, and whether you believe that that warrants development programs from outside. And I know the answer could well be it's both, but give me your perspective on whether you agree that this requires moving in and questioning many old paradigms, beliefs, assumptions, and so on. I'll direct this to Richard if he wants to get started first.
Okay, thank you, Sujaya, and good evening, everybody, and my fellow panelists as well. It's great to be here, Sujaya. The topic is very timely. Actually, this pandemic has, if you ask me, you said it's very rare. I mean, no leaders dealt with it. It's happened after 100 years, the scale at which it happened. And if you saw The Economist, it said the world is closed down, one of the cover page of The Economist. So I think, and when the pandemic first came in, I just thought I'll just give a little distinct context to it. I think everybody was scurrying around of trying to get their business back on track because the business stopped. Cash management, cash flows, working capital, that became this thing. But very quickly, I think within a month of it, people realized the leaders realized people are a very critical issue. And what do we do with people? Because suddenly your office moved to the home. And when you move the office to the home, lots of challenges actually came into during that period, because today you got disconnected from your people because they're no more in your sight. They are away from you. They're working from remote locations. They could be working from their home or from anywhere else. And I think at no other time, leadership has been challenged on the grounds of empathy, and I would say flexibility. How flexible and how empathetic are you towards this time? And also the character of the leader has also come into question as to how they dealt with the situation at that time. And how do you deal with your people? One thing is very clear, that as we come out of this pandemic, most of us will not do the similar job we did before we went into it. The jobs are going to change. So upskilling people becomes very different. So the point which you're saying where there are business schools or there are learning development institutes which have got the standard training programs, they won't work. You will need to develop something which is context to an organization. It depends where an organization, because each organization has come with their own vision. Some want growth, some want cost cutting, some want very different. So I think each organization has gone to develop their own training for their people. I think they used a lot of this time, most organizations, I can tell you for the consulting world, a lot of this time got used in retraining people, reskilling them, retooling them, and getting them ready for the new way of working. And also the other thing which everybody faced was, how do we get the people still continue to be motivated and get them energized to be in the organization? So I think the standard learning programs, some of them will still work. Let me tell you, some percentage will still work. It's not either or, but it will be both will continue to coexist. But I think new ways of working definitely came in. So this is my take on this, Sujaya.
Lovely. Super. So I'm going to move this over to Anil. Anil, what is your view? Do you believe that these times required a more intimate, a more sort of personal space of learning as compared to learning through formal education?
Yeah. So to start with, when you look at learning, about 70% in my mind happens on the job. And social learning is about 20%, and maybe theory and reading and all that contribute about 10%. Now, it's very interesting what's happening with technology. I think digital acceleration has happened so fast during the pandemic. It's probably, much faster than it ever happened before. And the interesting thing about technology is that it gives you a great deal of flexibility, first of all. So, you saw a lot of, we talked about migrants, people going back to the villages, but nobody talked about the IT migrants. So people who were working in IT companies, for instance, went back to wherever they came from, and they were seamlessly connected to work. And now with technology, teaming has got a different context altogether, because you're looking at a global intellectual pool, changes the dimension of the way we think. If you look at diversity, nothing stops you. You're going after talent. It doesn't matter age, sex, all that matters very little. Language matters very little. When you look at supervision, again, that has changed completely, because it can be smart, it is non-intrusive, and you're far more aware of what's going on all around you. And you have so many tools which can help you get completely automated. And the content, there's no lack of content, and people have the time to go through it. But in terms of the learning, clearly it has to be more intimate. And I think there's learning in everything that we do. For instance, just regular contact with our people, encouraging wins, sort of buoys them up. Giving them a chance to play leader gives them a different sort of exposure. Challenging status quo, because this is a time where there can be deeper thinking into what we're doing. If it doesn't work, what are the alternative ways of doing? You're navigating complexity all the time. You're dealing with real life situations. The focus can be changed to outcomes. So it's all of what you lead, and therefore it certainly is very personal. How to pivot, for instance, is very important, because the organization gives you a lot of resources to work with, and how you pivot makes a big difference to the outcomes. And of course, for all this, there has to be equal emphasis on your own personal well-being and that of your people. But let me give you an example to illustrate learning. We do a call. The nature of my job is that we make investments to change the growth trajectory for our company in various geographies. And so we work with government, we work with academia, we work with industry. We do proofs of concept, because when people see projects working, for instance, what's the digital transformation that's possible in an airport? When they see that happening, then you'll see a lot of investments coming in. So we do this call every week. And in the weekly call, we now have there are 8 countries on the call, and each country takes a chance, reviews the numbers like as if they were the leaders. So it gives them a different sort of exposure to what they've had. They have to be disciplined. And when we are disciplined, we find that everybody comes on time. So there's a subliminal learning there. There's a lot of preparation, because there are a lot of presentations which have to be made. And if you have 5 minutes for a presentation, if you haven't prepared yourself, you're going to be lost. And we also present the socio-economic updates for each of those countries. So again, people understand on the call about all the 8 countries that we're dealing with and of APJC. There's healthy competition, there's exchange of ideas, there's adoption of ideas from one country to the other, and there's a lot of debate. So I think certainly there's no question this type of learning is far more intimate. And while the other opportunity for learning is open to us, this can be made very, very potent depending on the way we treat it.
Lovely, super. So thanks for that. I'm just going to turn this over to Preeti and try and get a response from you, Preeti. Is that, often leadership development programs, across organizations, and I'm not calling out specifically which kinds, but by and large, there's a perception that leadership development programs have very little to do with real business that people are actually running. And what I mean by that, it's not going to actually help the leaders execute the strategy. And the other common perception around is that, most of these programs are a one size fits all. So they're not really actually accustomed to what it is are the real pain points within organizations. And you could easily argue this by saying, well, then organizations ought to tune in these programs to be able to address real pain points. But I want a reaction from you. You lead leadership development for TCS. Tell me what your own, and in your role as part of ICF, I'm sure you have access to what goes on in other organizations as well. Give me a sense on, how fair is this accusation that most of the leadership development program are feel good, including the executive development programs, which are very expensive, and organizations organize these for their leaders. And that one of the hesitation to continue investing on this is because they're not directly related to anything that they're going to do in terms of executing strategy. And there's very much a one-size-fits-all orientation to them. So just give me a reaction to this.
Sure, Sujaya. Thanks for that question. It's actually very, very pertinent. And I want to touch upon the previous, as I come into this,
Yeah.
that these are capricious times. They're unprecedented, they're unpredictable. Our role as leaders is to integrate this black swan phase into our lives. The situation in itself demands intimacy. And I think all our feminine competencies have come to the fore to be able to deal with them. Now, for most organizations are focused, including us, we've been focused a great deal on capability building, which is domain and behavior, and that's where we sit. But the goal is to actually ask for a shift in mindset, which is different from behavior, which is really saying, can we start plowing our inner lives and come to a state of understanding about why we do what we do and what works and what not? Or for that matter, are we listening to what we might have marginalized? This could be our own feelings or our style of behavior or people or communities and so on and so forth. And until we don't recognize, acknowledge, and understand that we have potentially left something out, progress is potentially not possible. So there's a bit of a realization that's come in through the last year, and it continues. To your specific question on one size fits all, I think here's what I'd say is that one is it's a misnomer. That's not possible. And yet it's a challenge for organizations, because when you're dealing with large numbers, what do? It's hard to really customize and provide every individual with what is exactly their need. And thus the psychometric industry. Everybody will get a report, and the report will say, this is what you're good at, this is what you're not good at, and here's what you've got to do. But it's not as simple as that. And it's hard to put together a framework that says, what is it that we can do that can actually be standardized as adult learners? And then how do you intrinsically motivate your population to go out and seek what they specifically need? And that's the lens that I like to work with. So the first aspect of that framework, which I believe can be standardized to some extent across humanity, I would say is this idea of context is most important. And the way I put it is, and it's my own experience through a consulting gig I did many, many years ago, which didn't go really well. And I remember one of my mentors being with us, and when we came out and we said, you know what, we presented everything we knew and we thought this would go well. And he says, well, just remember, contact before context. And it's so true. I think here is what the Times, and which is why intimacy is really contact. Establish contact with the learner. Let the learner establish contact with themselves, and then come into the context. Once dealt with two, then we speak about content. So standardization actually is really related only to content, not learning style, not the context. And thus there's an interesting blend that we can potentially create.
Right. Thanks, Preeti. I'm going to turn this over to Professor Datta. And, I have somebody on the chat box called Vibhakar Ramtirthkar. And he's saying that change is change. Lockdown is a bit different. Leadership is something which has to change from time to time, every time. Yesterday's leader is not successful today. Churchill was removed after World War II. So give me a reaction to this.
No, I think it's, I've been listening very carefully to the points made by my colleagues, and they're all so correct. I think, they all touched upon very important facets of this very unique time that we're living in right now. And our colleague in the chat box also has touched upon the fact that people have to change. No question about that. Now, I have been doing, as part of my own research, a study of 30 business school deans and 30 CEOs, and trying to ask the question through interviews about what has changed for them and how do they see their own leadership style changing in the future. And I think, the important message, if I had to simplify it, distill it down to something, is coming that a leader's role was very much seen as traditionally advancing the organizational goals. Yes, people were important, of course, you had to invest in people, but people was secondary to the organization's goals. And what actually has happened now with the COVID is leadership and leaders have been confronted with with perhaps the obvious reality that humanity trumps economics, that somehow people have to be treated first and business follows. It's just like, you say, make customers happy, the customers will buy, so the business will follow the customer satisfaction. In many ways, the business goals will follow at people's satisfaction, motivation, they're looking after whatever you want to phrase it. So I do believe, that a lot of the change doesn't necessarily have to be, you can only change yourself fundamentally to a certain degree. I think, we discover ourselves, discover different facets of ourselves. As Preeti said, the context changing, we discover some facets become more important than others. And I think what we have to discover now is more the human side of our leadership profiles. The human side has been discovered a little bit more, and we have to be able to put that human dimension much more center in terms of our leadership actions, leadership, sort of strategy that we have. And this might mean, very simple things like if employees are very concerned about some of their family members, dying because of COVID or other kinds of issues, for them to tell them about trying to reach the organization goals is not the right kind of message. Okay? You want to first of all make sure that they are psychologically looked after and fundamentally they feel comforted or reassured so that they can actually work on the organization goals. And I'm reminded of this message we always get when we all board a plane. I know most of us haven't boarded planes recently, that often. But the plane, they always tell you that in case of an emergency and you're traveling with a child, you first put the oxygen on yourself and then you put on the child. Okay, you got to look after yourself first. And this is one of the messages which we're getting from the interviews of the CEOs and leaders, is that people are realizing that I cannot look after other people if I cannot look after myself.
Yeah.
So it's not a selfish message, but much more a message that's saying that I have to, first of all, have the strength myself. I have to look after myself mentally, physically, because if I'm not strong, I will not be able to look after others in my organization. So, when we talk about change, I think it's not really you're talking about changing leaders like Churchill, as example is given. That certainly may have to be the case in some cases, but I think it's much more a case of people rediscovering some internal facets of their own profile, which perhaps are more suited for the current context.
Right. Right. So, Professor Datta, we have Vinay who's got a question for you in the chat box, and I'm going to take the opportunity to ask because it's directly related to something you just mentioned a while ago. And he's saying, I was really happy to hear the concept of connect being brought up. With the reality we saw in the last year and the change it has brought about, how important is it for organizations, read leaders, to realize that the internal customer is also important, not only the end customer? Will there be this shift in the leadership thought process? Also, will this get related to the example of the oxygen mask? What's your own take? Is there going to be a shift in wanting this behavior or grooming leaders for this kind of behavior, or even articulating this in terms of what is desired leadership?
So I do agree, of course, that, I guess what is meant by internal customer are your internal employees. So your employees, of course, important just as your external customers who buy your products. But I really mean it is much more than a customer transactional value. Because, with the notion of a customer somehow has this idea of a transaction. The customer buys something, you do something to satisfy the customer gives you back something. Even the definition, if you look at all the process work that happen, inside the organization, internal customer definition is the process produces some output to the internal customer. So this notion of transaction is very much inherent in a customer, the use of the word customer, which I don't disagree with, but I just think is incomplete. Right now, I think we have to look at the human side of the person.
Yes.
be it outside or inside. Look at your child or a family member. There's no necessary transaction taking place out there, economic transaction. You look after the person because the person is a human being you care about. So I think that notion of caring for fellow human beings is something that has to happen today more widely and perhaps more explicitly, both inside and outside. Now, that does not mean that business should not happen. I'm not trying to say that, because what I'm saying is that if you care for people in the right quote unquote manner, then essentially they will do the right things. Okay, so whether it's internal things, external things, they will sort of react the right way.
Thank you. I think that's nice, well-defined answer. I'm going to move this over to Gauri. And Gauri, I know there've been many attempts, various groups, and I think some of the other learning forums have also attempted, platforms have also attempted to be able to identify what levers shifted, during this last very turbulent time that we've experienced. What levers have shifted in terms of expectations from leaders? And you're right at the center of being able to sort of define what it is that organizations want or expect from leaders. And I'm keen to hear and know from you, what levers, according to you, have shifted in terms of expectations from leaders? If people are hiring leadership talent at this time, what are they looking for the most?
So thank you, Sujaya, and thank you to the panel for a fantastic conversation so far. As we look at this very disrupted last 10 months that we've gone through, we come to realize that through conversations with leaders across the globe, and we do work with a number of really significant companies who really sort of made the shift, that no programs could have prepared business leaders for this very disruptive space that we live in today, that virtually sort of shut the world down. And very clearly, what we found was leaders who sort of, were able to regroup, to rethink after an initial reaction. They took stock of the situation and put in place actions that, positively impacted organizations to build business continuity and sort of work towards recovery. During the course of this, what we found was experiential learning became very critical. And we saw a lot of peer networks come into play, whether they were industry networks, internal networks, or sectoral networks. And there were learnings that were driven through these small groups and sometimes large groups. And the reason I bring this up is leaders sort of reacted to those learnings very differently. And when we look at moving forward in this space of recovery, I think the big ask from almost every organization is they need transformative leaders, they need agile leaders, and they need leaders who are going to be innovative in a scenario where there is no playbook, where they're going to sort of, in some ways, invent their playbook as it goes along. And therefore, there is very clearly not enough data that they're going to need to work with as they make those decisions. There are a whole host of other things, Sujaya, that sort of come into play. But if I were to look at it, center and core of it would be some of the things that I just mentioned.
Super. But, I'm going to pass around this question, which is to be able to understand from each one of you, what levers do you think have shifted? If you were hiring a leader into your organization, what would you be looking for at this time? So I'm going to move this over to Anil first. Anil, what levers have shifted and what is it that you believe organizations are looking for, at least in your industry?
Sure. But before I address that, there are a couple of comments. Professor Datta was talking about the internal customer, the employee. I think the big change there is that when you've shifted your office to the home, you're 24 hours in the office. And that's a big change.
Yeah.
And therefore, this focus on well-being is not good enough. They're looking at the quality of life that they're leading, improving. So
Yeah.
I think that changes the equations as far as the employees go. There's also a comment that Gauri made about the scale. It's so unprecedented. Now, let me give you an example of TCS, and Preeti will endorse what I'm saying. They moved 450,000 people to work from home in less than maybe a couple of weeks. They're digitally supervising 23,000 projects. And they did their AGM, and you know how many shareholders they have. They did it entirely digitally. So that's the scale that you're looking at, and therefore the leadership equations have changed. So what should be the mindset? Organizations will always say they want, first of all, you take care of all the hygiene issues, safety, and so on and so forth. You must have a holistic point of view, not a myopic point of view. We've given you resources, so use those resources well, reconfigure them if you need to, but use them well. And the underlying commitment has to be that there has to be execution excellence, so that the best results under the circumstances can be delivered. And many companies are proving that. So when you look at the mindset, I would say, you've got to be on perpetual beta, in the sense you've got to be continuous innovation. You've got to be thinking about how to do it better, because the circumstances are new and you've got to figure out how to face them. Second, I think there's got to be a priority bias, in the sense you've got to do the more important things first, because you don't know what resources you have to conserve, because the equations have changed, the outlook is unclear, and so on and so forth. The third is that decision making can no longer be hierarchical, because the people higher up in the hierarchy might be further away from the ground truth. And so if you don't have a sensing mechanism to be able to gather what's going on and what's changing, and it's changing so dynamically from the ground, your decision making itself is going to be flawed. So I think the third is democratization of decisioning. And then you would have a lot of dexterity in terms of the assets that you have and how you use it, and the new partnerships that you forge, and the pivot if need be, and so on and so forth. And finally, digital thinking. It's come into prominence now much more than before. And when you think of digital thinking, it's about exponential versus incremental thinking, first of all. So why can't you why are you looking at 1.5x? Why aren't you looking at 10x? Because that's possible with digital. Of course, complicated because of the pandemic, but digital thinking goes that way. It has to be strategy led, not technology led, strategy led, and technology as an enabler. Focus on the outcomes. And the playbook that you used so far is not going to work. So you need a whole new playbook.
Right.
And therefore you've got to be brave enough to throw that old playbook out of the window and adopt the new playbook.
Well said. I think with that, I'm going to move to Preeti. Preeti, I have a question for you, and I'm going to ask Gautam Mukhopadhyay's question. And he's saying, I'm interested to know how the leaders in the new economy has dealt with taking decisions regarding pay cuts, retrenchment, furloughing, axing so many jobs, livelihoods of people. How do they synergize their human side of leadership with authenticity and originality? Request any of the panelists to take it. I'm just offering it to you.
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize that leadership goes through the same pains and aches that the system does. It's hard. It's hard to even think about it. I fortunately come from an organization where we didn't have to experience it. In fact, we experienced the opposite. We experienced growth. There is no formula. There is no way to say this is how we deal with it, or here is how one can feel better about it. We go through the mechanics of trying to save the situation, trying to support in different ways, trying to say how do we do what is right by the organization, by the individual, and sort of get stretched in the middle. And there is no denying that. I think the authenticity that comes in is how do we deal with the situation with objectivity, fairness, and consideration.
Mm-hmm.
I would pause at that because there is absolutely no easy way of working with this, and yet it needs to be done sometimes.
Yeah. Professor Datta, I'm going to pass on this comment, and it's comment come question. He wants like a view, which is this is Thomas Alex, and he's saying, in my view, this is the perfect time to evolve leadership styles and free oneself of old world rigid thoughts and notions. The key is to be flexible in your mind and experiment with new styles and approaches. Experimentation comes with its own risks, but more often than not, the greatest risk is not taking any risk at all. Do you want to respond to this?
Sure. And if you don't mind, can I just add a word to what Preeti said about the previous comment? Because I think it's so important, and I think I completely agree with Preeti said. In management, there is a sort of a concept that has been studied quite extensively called organizational justice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sense of how people feel about the organization broadly defined. And sort of there are two components to it. So one is what can be termed as distributive justice, the sense of justice with the outcome, and other is procedural justice, your sense of justice with the process. So let's say, for example, you don't get a salary cut. You don't get a salary increase this year. In fact, you get a salary cut. You might dislike the outcome, but there's a process that was used to arrive at the decision of the salary cut or salary freeze. And those two elements are distinct. So what the research has shown is that people actually identify and distinguish between the two. So if you actually ask people, they can distinguish between distributive justice and procedural justice. But also what they have seen is that for performance, so which of these two, so both elements are important. I'm not trying to say the research shows one is not important, both are important, but of the two, which one is more important for performance is procedural justice. Mm-hmm. And this is linked to what Preeti said, is that what procedural justice basically means is that the decisions you take have to be taken with the maximum possible empathy, the maximum possible consideration of viewpoints of different people, the maximum possible offer to help, and care, essentially, so human care. So in some sense, I'm just reinforcing what Preeti said, but I think it's important to keep in mind that in times when, like this pandemic, when there are layoffs and so on, from an outcome point of view, people may not like what they see. And from a leadership point of view, may not have a choice, but to in fact go that path of layoffs. But how you manage the process is extremely important. And that is something which I think leaders should try to focus on. And they can, in fact, do a better job at managing the process and not just do it in a very sort of quick and simple manner. On the other question that you asked, Jay, just remind me, I lost my thought out there. What was the other question that was? The question was...
This was actually a question on the chat. It's been asked by Vinay. I'm sorry, by Madhavan. And he says that, sorry, I think I need to get you the other one. Give me a second. Yes, this was asked by Thomas Alex, and he's saying, in my view, this is the perfect time to evolve leadership styles and free oneself of old world rigid thoughts and notions. This is the key is to be flexible in your mind, experiment with new styles and approaches. Experimentations come with their own risks, but the greatest risk might be not taking a risk at all. That's his question.
I think the need to be more flexible, has been mentioned by all my esteemed colleagues. I think Richard, Gauri, Anil, they all mentioned it. The whole idea of continuous beta flexibility is very important. I think from my point of view, what I'd like to add to that is that it's very important to have the courage to take some different paths. Because what often happens is, most leaders who are today successful in organizations, they're arrived at that position because they have been successful in doing what has made the organization successful. Now, certainly, if you have to go down a different path, it requires some degree of non-trivial courage to be able to change paths. So let's say for education, if you have been successful offering, in-person programs for years, and that's what made your, organization thrive, suddenly to say, okay, we're going to shift and move to a different kind of a model requires that courage. So I think for me, the most important thing is courage. Do we find the courage inside us to be able to take the different action? And the second thing is, of course, taking different action doesn't mean do it blindly and do it without, any kind of careful analysis. So you need to also be able to do experimentation, and that's sort of linked into the whole idea of the continuous beta too. So can you actually conduct controlled experiments? And can you in fact learn from the experiments quick enough and evolve? And this is what, Amazon and other tech companies do nowadays. They do A/B testing, extensively, and they do it at a micro level. They do it for micro things. I'm just talking about even the bigger ideas of using data from controlled experimentation to build the courage to take some different courses of action.
Right. Thanks, Professor Datta. I'm going to move this over to Richard. And Richard, the question on what levers do you see shifting around expectations from leaders? Yeah, what has shifted in your opinion? What is it that organizations want now from leaders? You're on mute, Richard. Richard, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. See, Sujaya, if you ask me, the shift was taking even place before COVID. There was a big shift changing in terms of the new kind of leaders that were required, because you needed more collaborative leaders. You needed agility became a very big item. Of course, it's more pronounced now, but agility has become very pronounced now. And if you don't have an agile leader, I mean, everybody's talking about, the previous question where you said, how can companies become successful? And I can see some or many companies actually did not do any layoffs, because the way they operated was they found new business opportunities, they reskilled their people, they redeployed them, and they continued with it without even any pay cuts. So there are companies which have managed that. And I think it's for the leader to take those bold decisions, to be courageous, to go there and even start to think of growth in a COVID period is not easy, because here you're thinking of cutting costs. Actually, what most people did, honestly, and I think that's where everybody went wrong, they went into a defensive mode of cutting cost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you need in leaders today, you need leaders who can take decisions with nothing fixed. I mean, everything today is unfixed. You don't have any precedent. You don't have anything to fall back on, and you are hitting out in the dark. But you are doing it on certain basis, because I would say what you're looking for is leaders who can actually reinvent the future. When people speak about cost cutting, I say no, reimagine cost. Okay, how you look at cost in a very different way, and then look at it. How do you look at revenue? How do you look at new markets? Alliances, let me tell you the kind of things that I've seen happen in the marketplace, where very tough competitors have come together and become alliance partners. Because today, marketplace is common. How do you actually come together to actually keep the market share or keep your thing going? So I think, and each one needs to understand their strength. So it requires, and you require leaders with a lot of empathy. Actually, empathy was always there for leaders, right? But now it has become more pronounced that you need leaders who are very empathetic, who have got a duty of care to the employees, who are able to connect to the employees. I mean, to able to sit, and touch your employee directly, like we heard different speakers talk about. How do you actually reach out to the employees? And I would say, I would throw one word in out here. This is something which is very close to my heart and which I truly follow, is that this is the time when leaders need to have a higher purpose. They need to have a purpose which is beyond the transaction, which is beyond the, I would call it your capital account. And if you have a higher purpose, I think that will be your guiding principle, or that will take you to arrive at a decision. See, many decisions are going to go wrong, because when you're hitting in the dark, things are going to go wrong. But you should not be in a position of not taking a decision. And that's where a lot of things have failed, because leaders did not take the decision. And because you have to take decisions very fast, you have to cut hierarchy. You have to go and take the calls. Some you have to take executive calls, sometimes you have to empower people. I would say empowerment is another big item which has come up now. How do you empower your people and truly empower? Not where you say I'm empowering people and don't empower them, but actually empower them. And I would say live your values. Because values are created not for good times. Values are created for these kind of times. The true value and character of an organization, of a leader, actually comes out, and you could see the difference of people who succeeded during this COVID times and who did not. These will be, if somebody does a research paper at some point, I'm sure this will come out. Secondly, there is nothing that leaders can fall back on. So you need, I think, courage. I've heard the word courage a number of times. I think courage is something very important for leaders going forward. Agility, courage, collaborative behavior, and their ability to connect with people. because inspirational leadership is what is required. People should be able to believe in the leader, and also the trust. I would say trust all-time low. Can leaders be trusted? And I would like to throw this word into the thing that how can leaders get trusted by their people and they follow them? I would just leave it at that. Yes, Sujay.
Super well said, actually. I'm going to now just do a round robins to be able to. A lot of people in the audience want to know about trends. So they want to know what are organizations really doing at this time. They want to understand how they're hiring at this time. So I'm just going to ask you a lot of trends related questions. So we'll start with you, Preeti. Yeah, what you believe? What is TCS doing? What are organizations doing, in your opinion? What kind of leadership development is gaining momentum? What is the requirement, and how are we getting our arms around capability building for leaders at this time? You're on mute, Preeti.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I said, for one, we as an organization, and I think others are doing the same, are recognizing that there is an ongoing emphasis on human and social sustainability. It's become a really important aspect of our lens for the future. For leadership development specifically, business continuity and adaptability has become a real life priority, and change at scale is where a lot of the attention is. Leadership has had to in the recent past and is expected to show up as innovative, agile, resilient, anti-fragile, and so on and so forth. There is no missing the point in this one.
Right.
To my point on human sustainability, I think we are recognizing across the board as organizations that people matter most, and leveraging the paradox of business and life, which is balanced decisions, well understood trade-offs, is really now being spoken of very openly. There is great deal of attention to, as well as training around deep democracy, which is step into transparency, acknowledge business changes and challenges with all employees, including steps that the organization might take to deal with the challenges. What are the strategies over time, etc. I'd also say blending psychological safety with productivity, and somewhere looking at quality of life as an organizational imperative rather than do-it-yourself imperative. We come here to work and then go back and figure it out. Leaders are undoubtedly being prompted to think deep and wide, which is what's the ability to think exponentially for wicked problems. And I think it was Anil's point earlier that there was no way we could have been prepared for this. There's just nothing that would have had us ready. In fact, I continue to be surprised and proud that we as TCS could actually take 450,000 people on a virtual working on SPWS almost immediately.
Quite incredible, actually.
Really incredible and seamlessly done. But here's the thing, you can't change people's mind as quickly as you can implement technology. So leadership potentially has to be the anchor of change. And how do we get them to make sure that they are empathetic, they're curious, they're courageous, they're empowering their colleagues, they're agile around work practices. In the process, they're also dismantling some of the hierarchy that exists, because with that, one can't work. What are the inclusive approaches they're taking? And yet, are we still productive? Are we still efficient? Are we still meeting our bottom line? Are we still innovating? So it's just I think the emphasis on leadership development is far more than it used to be. It's no longer a feel good, do good, here's a gift kind of thing. It is a real life ability. It's almost a social skill at the workplace that everybody needs to have, with the understanding that this is not leadership with hierarchy only. I think this is leadership at all levels at this stage.
So well put. I'm going to turn this over to Professor Datta. Professor Datta, two of our panelists have said nothing could have prepared us for this, for this very challenging, sort of very classical Black Swan event. I want to know from you, having been in executive education for so long and research and your association with so many Ivy League schools and all of that, what is it that we can do in the leadership development space that will not get us to say this again, that nothing could have developed us for, or prepared us for these times?
Black Swan events are, of course, Black Swans by definition, but there are tools that organizations have used to plan for different scenarios. Classical tool is scenario planning. So it was very popular in the 70s, has come back now in recent years, and is being used. So I would encourage people to think more about scenario planning and integrating that as a basic tool inside their own toolbox. And scenario planning is one amongst a set of other possible approaches that can help brainstorm about what are the different risks that you see in the environment, and then to assign probabilities and try to assign some kind of capabilities. I'll give you a simple example. We all are very happy and proud about how we handled online learning, in America and India, and I'm sure many other places. I don't know how many of us know, but in many Asian countries like Singapore, since the SARS crisis many years ago, the government actually requires every university and every school to do, I think, 1 or 2 weeks of online education every year. Okay, it's a question of preparedness. And so when the thing came to move online completely, it was simple for them to actually change because they were prepared for it. Now, so I think in some sense, doing more scenario planning, trying to understand a little bit more what kind of preparedness actions can be taken inside the organization can help. And of course, you can't prevent everything, but I think you can certainly prepare some of the capabilities that you need for successfully operating. I think what was unique about still is unique about the COVID situation, that it is global and it touches everyone, and there is no uniformity in how it is being treated. So every country has got different responses, and it's still a little chaotic. And the lack of governance at an international scale is also hurting us. I'm in Europe right now, and the response of each country is completely, different and coordinated. They're talking today about closing borders once again across Europe. I mean, it's completely, the lack of governance at an international level is also hurting us right now.
Right, right. I'm going to try and move this on, to Gauri and ask Gauri, what do you see? What are the trends? Yeah, do you see organizations still hire leaders? We do know that a lot of organizations fired leaders, but we're interested to know from you, what are they looking for now? And, is there still a demand for being able to hire leaders? What has changed in this whole space of senior executive search?
Some things that have changed, and I think the change happened even before the pandemic, but the pandemic has only accelerated it, Sujaya. And I say this because as I think about a year ago, we were already talking to people about how digital transformation is going to change the needs of enterprises across the globe, and how that is sort of in some ways going to impact leadership going forward. I think what the pandemic has done is really sort of press the pedal on that in terms of looking at how do you get this done fast. I think the panelists have already talked about agility, about empathy. It is more some of the softer skills that are changing in terms of requirements going forward. But I think the biggest one that we are seeing is that element of being able to communicate with a certain level of authenticity that sort of allows you to deliver sometimes very bad news. But you do it because you've already built trust and credibility with your stakeholders, whether they are your shareholders, whether they are your internal employees or your customers. And I think that element really sort of speaks to what future leaders will look like. The other bit that we are seeing is really being able to collaborate. And I think Professor Datta spoke about this. This is collaboration that is much wider. It's virtual collaboration where you are sort of creating platforms where you can work with other enterprises, newer forms of partnerships and alliances that will allow you to share in R&D and ideas and innovation so that you can sort of, come through with better products going forward. So I think that collaboration has very clearly shifted in the way enterprises are looking at it. And as I think of the pandemic, I can think of organizations that shared their employees with other organizations where there was a spike in terms of demand. And that sort of, in some ways, safeguarded employment for a number of people who would have otherwise been in a slightly different situation. So as I, that is another space. The collaborative leader is going to very clearly be someone who's going to be big in demand.
Right.
Other bit that we talked about was this experiential learning and the ability to introspect and to be sensitive to what customers, stakeholders would require going forward, and then really be able to drive decisions quickly, sometimes with not enough information. So that ability to be decisive is going to be very critical as well going forward. I'm just touching on a couple,
Yes.
but these would be in some ways call outs in addition to what's already been discussed in terms of agility, empathy, executive, credibility, all of that.
Right. Great. I'm going to move this conversation into the fact that, the last 10 months has been an incredible time to be able to sort of unveil leadership at all levels. So there's practically no organization that has not experienced sort of crisis heroes, if you want to call them that. People at other levels within the organizations, who did some really heroic things during these times. I just want to know what it is that your organizations are doing, or what you believe organizations are doing, to be able to groom leaders at all levels and use this adversity well to be able to identify and nurture leadership across levels within organizations. I'm going to take this over to Preeti first, and then maybe ask Anil if he's seeing that within his industry as well. So, Preeti, leadership at all levels, and have you seen people emerge? Did you see that during these times? I think that's been the experience of most organizations across industries. That they saw like a distribution of authority automatically happen through remote working and the rest of that. And as a result, more empowerment for people to solve problems. So whoever was closer to the problems got empowered to be able to come forth and start solving those problems. And as a result, many organizations waking up to sort of, heroism at different levels across the organization. So I want to know if you've had similar experiences.
It's really been quite incredible, and I'll speak only for TCS on this one, to be within the organization and see how people have self-organized, how the attention and emphasis has been on seamlessness of operations, how people have supported each other, how the face of HR has completely altered and has become extremely personalized and intimate. With that somewhat taken care of, what it allows us to do then is to focus on the work at hand. It's somewhat cultivating safety in the ecosystem, priority towards people in the ecosystem, and holding anybody's hand that needs hand holding. So it's there's a great deal of humane leadership that has shown up at the workplace in the 10 months. And I do believe that for us, it's been a cultural lift. There are things that we forget when we are a part of a high-paced, large-scale organization. Everybody is really busy, and busyness somewhat translates into intellectual, transactional kind of behavior. And here's been a time where we were forced to pause and forced to look at what was really important, and thus integrate the polarity of more participative, more inclusive, more relational behaviors. So that's where we currently stand. And I think in terms of what is it that we are doing towards building greater attention in our leadership frameworks, I would think it's everything that's already been spoken of. But maybe the one point that I'd like to mention is leadership from a distance. To say that this idea of people working from home is a very beautiful and a romantic idea on one level, but actually is really overwhelming for most people.
Hmm.
And thus, how do we lead without adding uh, to that pressure that the employee might already be feeling?
Right.
And it's important for, we call it leadership from a distance so that we can thrive through adaptation.
Hmm.
And it might seem like a go-to phrase, but actually there's a lot of emphasis in that, because all that we're really saying is that there's a great deal of diversity in everybody's life.
Right.
Everybody has different modes of operating, different lifestyles, different ecosystems, different people to support, etc., etc.
Right.
And can leaders then bring in inclusion and inclusive mindsets to be able to deal with the situation?
Right, right. I still don't have the answer to the question I was asking. I think everything you've said is just so relevant and beautiful. Did you see leaders emerging across the organization? I mean, at the mid-junior bands, and have you seen now in an organization that has more leaders who did, like I said, emerged as the heroes in a crisis?
Sure. I'm sorry. I clearly missed the point in which case. So I would say yes. To my earlier point of how people self-organize themselves.
Hmm.
And I think what's emerged is circular teams
Hmm.
and a circular style of distributed style of leadership. There are heroes that have emerged in supporting each other, transferring leave to each other, managing other people's work so that they could take care of what was potentially personal and at that time more critical. Uh, I think the heroism for this, for us, vis-a-vis what I said earlier, is really the fact that people have emerged and are now bringing their whole selves to work.
Right.
And that is the heroism that will show up in little ways and big ways all around the organization. There are stories as well. There are stories about, you know, showing up when there was nobody. Stories about somebody living totally alone and didn't have anywhere to go. But those stories are all emerging from the fact that there's greater ownership, there's greater belonging, and there's potentially more ownership over self through this whole process.
Right, right. Lovely. So, I'm going to do a quick round robins, starting with Richard. Richard, what is the space for formal education as far as leadership development is concerned in this space? Do you think organizations should continue doing that, even if it is, we spoke about many aspects of what it is that we want or expect from leaders. Do you still see a space for, or do you see prominently a space for formal education around this?
I think formal education, Sujaya, you can't take it away. But I would say formal education should change in some ways, because whoever is going to do it should first understand the vision and the business strategy of the organization. It cannot be one size fits all. So you can't have one course which everybody will do. So if one understands where that particular organization, or what are the challenges to its growth, what are the challenges to its existence, I would say to its business continuity, and what kind of leaders do they require at that stage, and then say that is the kind of leaders that you want to build. Because if education becomes very contextualized, if it gets very fitting that particular organization, you need formal education. It's not that you don't need it, but you need it after you understand what the issues and challenges for that leadership is, for that team is. And one can see this happening in, I would say, specialized learnings, in doing specialized courses. For example, I tell you, in KP, even before this pandemic, we had Harvard come and understand what we were doing, and then they developed a course for us. So I think it's important that organizations understand, because then they can put those case studies, they can put those kind of things, education out there. Because if we don't do that, I think we are going to have a challenge when it comes to. And I think the one important point which we have discussed also, I just like to put this one of the points which maybe didn't get covered. I think in leaders we need infinite mindset. I think leaders need an infinite mindset in this kind of situation, because to take even Anil's point by saying you think exponentially, and if you only have an infinite mindset, can you think exponentially? And I think our performance management systems that we have today are outdated, because they do not measure truly the outcome which has come there, because today we're working from home. So how do we actually measure how people are performing, number one, so that we are being fair to them in the way we evaluate them. And secondly, I think the performance management system, which talks about evaluating the softer skills, is not actually doing it. Because you see, all people are getting promoted on their technical and capabilities, and they keep going up the organization. But I think a greater emphasis would need to be made. I'm sorry, I'm just going away from your question.
Yeah.
I think it's
No,
important.
but your point's relevant.
Yeah, but I think it's important that the softer part of it needs to get it. You know, organizations talk of values. Do they actually see that those values are being lived by those people, by the leaders, by everybody? And I think that is getting reflected, and that is getting now brought out. In fact, like when we are developing a new balance scorecard at KPMG for the partners, this is getting a very, very prominent space now. So there is a change now. The balance scorecard is changing now, and then saying, okay, how do we look at it? It's just not about numbers now. It's about these other factors which need to come in, and people are going to get docked for these things. It's just and financially, not just giving a pat hand or something. So I think it's important that organizations live what they talk. I would say that's the way I would put it, Sujaya.
Right. So I'm going to move this over to Professor Datta. Professor Datta, we were talking about agility being a requirement. We're talking about being innovative. We're talking about leaders being human-centric. Can this be taught in a classroom?
I do think so, because teaching happens through a number of different sort of modes. Of course, sometimes there's a theory part of it. Sometimes there is a social learning part of it. You hear examples, you talk. Sometimes you discuss your own challenges, get feedback. And of course, there's an important element of putting in practice. As Anil said, a lot of the learning is actually happening on the job and putting in practice. So I think there's a combination. All of this is possible. And I think our definition of what we mean by formal learning has to evolve. I think Richard already referred to it, but it need not be your traditional 5-day executive program or, for example, a 10 webinar session. We probably need to find ways to leverage technology to reach more into the life of the employee or the leader on the job. To be able to connect the leader to other people's much more fluidly and much more easily, and not just only in the program, but what about after the program? Have all these bite-sized learning things available more easily, So I think there's a number of different elements, but we need to reimagine formal education, and this is a challenge for Capstone and this challenge for Igacia. Hopefully we can do something together on that. But the challenge for, I think, every university and every business school in the world.
Right. So true. I'm going to move this over to Anil. Anil, what is your view on this? Yeah, we spoke about a lot of things we're expecting from leaders. Can this be taught in a classroom? What's your sense?
So let me talk about the relevance of education also. See, I think it's more relevant than ever before, because there's been a hierarchical reversal, as it were. People closer to the ground are the people who control what's going on. And so the traditional hierarchies are going to change. Now, under those circumstances, you need leaders at every level. And how are you going to produce these leaders at every level? You have to train them differently, because the leadership DNA itself has been redefined. Now, for instance, if you see, they've got to think differently. So you're talking about, VUCA times: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. But you still got to be decisive despite all that. How are you going to train people to do that? They've got to react differently. There's no need to compromise quality or excellence just because of the pandemic.
Right.
How do you train people to think that way? How can you be strong, but how can you be humane at the same time?
Right.
And then most importantly, how are you going to interact differently? How are you going to hold different perspectives? How are you going to listen to them, understand it, distill it, and hold different points of view in your mind? Not easy for everybody to do at every level.
Right.
How are you going to, redouble your efforts at connecting? Because connecting with people makes such a difference. How are you going to let go of biases?
Right.
How are you going to collaborate? Why do you need to collaborate? Because you have to create new models. So I think leadership education is more relevant than ever now. And we've got to figure out, with this reversal in hierarchy, what can we do about leadership education?
Couldn't agree more. This is such relevant points. I'm going to turn this over to Gauri. Gauri, what is
Yeah.
your
So, Sujay, I couldn't agree more. I think there has been a shift in terms of leadership education. And I do very clearly believe that there is a place for it. But I think there is a differentiated kind of learning and education that we will need going forward. And I think the analogy that I can think of that would sort of closest in some ways describe that would be what pilots go through when they go through their simulators in terms of really dealing with crisis. And, I think leaders today are in very similar situations. And therefore, how can we test them and learn from, situations that are in some ways simulated real time,
Yeah.
where you need to react in the immediacy. And when I think about that, I think this entire space of digital, where you have AI and, virtual reality and all of it coming into play,
Yeah.
it is very clearly a very exciting space for
Yes.
us to be able to challenge ourselves in terms of how do we think about problem solving going forward.
Super. Lovely answer. I'm going to turn the last point over to Preeti, and I have Gautam Mukhopadhyay in the Q&A box with a question. He's saying agility of a leader is often dependent on the organizational culture and the top management commitment. What is your take on this?
Well, the answer is not straightforward, but I'd say that, well, to some extent, yes. But I do believe that the agility of a leader is really dependent on how they intend to show up. Organizational culture, and I'm somebody who takes care of it within my own organization, is not something that is infused only from the top. It's actually cultivated and created by each one of us who participate in the ecosystem of the organization. Leadership commitment, top management commitment, undoubtedly makes it easier and simpler for us to navigate systems. And yet at the same time, I think it's leadership accountability and responsibility. I think it's employee accountability to take ownership for how they show up.
Right. Right. I think there's some incredible comments in the chat box. Lots of praise for each one of you, I must say. You have awesome explanations on how leadership needs to change as we move forward. There surely needs to be a paradigm shift in thought, as well as the way in which we lead and manage people. Agility and resilience are going to be key differentiators. Please continue sharing, leadership from a distance and invisible leadership. What will be the future? Anyone? Leadership from a distance and invisible leadership. You spoke about, Preeti, you spoke about leadership from a distance. There's Vibhakar asking, what will be the future of this?
I think the big idea is that, and possibly what the universe is nudging us to do, is to learn how to effectively lead ourselves. If we can come to that place, I think the whole definition of leadership will alter. And I read one of the comments around paradigm shift. I don't know about the paradigm shift. I think what calls out to me as a leader is really becoming even more authentic, getting in touch with who I truly am, getting everybody to prioritize and look at their life as one container rather than these many vectors of life.
Yeah.
So I do believe that let's really focus on self-leadership. Once that's done, we'll possibly sit down again and then say, all right, how do we redefine leadership? What does it really mean?
Yeah. But well said. Thank you for that response. I think at this point, I'm going to try and bring this conversation to a closure. I think this has been such an incredibly interesting and insightful conversation. The audience feels the same way. So I want to be able to thank each one of you. I mean, you're so accomplished and so learned and so erudite. And I must say that we feel really, really sort of overwhelmed and very grateful that you found the time to be able to join us here today. So I want to thank Richard Rekhi for having taken the time. Thank you so much.